I think we're ready to get started. For those of you who, I think I know most of you, but for those of you who don't know me, I'm Nancy Furfer. I'm with the Metropolitan Planning Council. And unfortunately, Mark had a conflict for today, so I guess I'm getting an early start on chairing the committee. And I thank you all for being here and hope that you all had a chance to enjoy the beautiful weekend we had. Hopefully it won't be the last for a while, but it may be, so hopefully you did. Before we begin, I do need to read the statement to make us all very legal. As permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of August 21st, 2020, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee to meet in person. To ensure a transparent and open meeting as possible, we will be posting the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. So thank you. With that, I guess we need a roll call. So Matt, if you would do a roll call, please.
Yes, so we will do the roll call and the approval of the last meeting's minutes together in order to save us all a little bit of a headache. So I'm going to read down the member list, and please just respond. You know what, I guess formally, Nancy, you'll probably want to entertain a motion for approval of the minutes, and then I can do this and I'll read down the names.
Oh, we're going to do both together. Great. Okay, I assume all of you have had a chance to read the minutes from the last meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to those minutes? If not, all those in favor, and then I will turn it over to Matt, and it will be here and approval or not.
Yeah, I think we should just entertain a motion from one member to.
Oh, we do a motion?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I would like a motion for, who would like to make a motion to approve the minutes? I'm sorry.
This is Bob, second.
Great. Now we have a motion. I will get used to this. It's been a while since I chaired a meeting. All those in favor, Matt, take over.
Thank you. Perfect. All right. So yeah, yay or nay. This will also serve as your roll call for the meeting today. Matt Asselmeyer, Kendall County.
Yes.
Thank you. Drew Awesome.
Aye.
Adam Ballard.
Aye.
Alan Banks.
Aye.
Angela Brooks. Susan Campbell. Tom Chafalo. Lisa DiChiara.
Aye.
Thank you. Mackenzie Draws.
Aye.
David Du Bois.
Aye.
Ben Fenton.
Aye.
Nancy Furfer.
Aye.
Veronica Gonzalez. Paul Haas. Christine Kolb. Steve Minella.
Aye.
Heather Tabbert Mullins.
Aye.
Sylvia Parham. Arnold Randall. Caitlin Ritter.
Aye.
Dennis Sandquist.
Hans is here in his place.
Thank you, Hans. Kyle Smith, I believe, could not make it today. Bob Tucker.
Aye.
Mark Vankerkopf, also not present today. Eric Wagoner. And Miriam Zook.
Aye.
Thank you. Are there any other members who I missed or alternates who are present on behalf of a member who did not check in?
Matt, this is Dominic here. I'm not sure. I see Paul Haas is on, but muted. So if I don't remember him responding, but he is present.
Noted. Thank you.
Okay, if that's it, before we get actually into the agenda, for those of you that are comfortable, I'd love to have you turn your webcam on so we could all see each other. Would be great. So, thank you. And if you mute yourself while we are going through this, that would be helpful because sometimes here's background noise. So we're doing that too. The first item, and I think it's a really important focus area that CMAP has, is their climate focus. So with that, Jason Nevada will take over and introduce this topic.
Good morning. This is
sorry. Forgive me. Nancy is actually going to be Nora Beck instead of Jason today. So sorry about that, Nora.
Well, Nora, take it away, Nora.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. Hi, everybody. I'm Nora Beck. I'm a senior planner in the Plan Implementation and Legislative Affairs Division. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So following ONTO 2050, CMAP identified climate mitigation and adaptation as a key area of work going forward for the agency. This morning, I'm hoping to provide you with three things: a quick recap of our climate challenge and the ONTO 2050 recommendations focused on mitigation and adaptation, an overview of CMAP's current resources for climate work, as well as the projects underway right now this year. And then if you could go back a slide, I'm still on the intro one, thank you. And then I'll focus in on just one of our current projects, the development of a multi-year implementation plan for the agency's climate work. My goal is that coverage of those three things can help set the stage for a good discussion this morning. I'm hoping to get your feedback on what you think CMAP should focus in on in our multi-year implementation plan to meet the climate challenge. So with that, let's get started. And the next slide. As you know, one of the goals of ONTO 2050 is envisioned in a region that's prepared for climate change. And there are two main thrusts to this: intensified climate mitigation efforts, and then plan for climate resilience. To inform the conversation about implementation, I want to quickly review the scale of the climate issues. I'm sure you're very familiar with this, but just make sure we're thinking about the right scale. And this context, this provides some context for the specific strategies in ONTO 2050. So with this current slide that's showing now, we are using our greenhouse gas inventory, which tracks emissions, and ONTO 2050 set a goal for reaching climate stabilization by the year 2050. This was set for a reduction of emissions by 80% of what they were in 1990 by the year 2050. Sort of a weird metric, but it's the best scientific guidance that we had at the time of the plan adoption. The need for a pretty dramatic decrease in emissions is very apparent. We need to get rid of at least 100 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent. It's important to note that we may need to revisit this goal in light of both evolving research as well as government inaction. So given the scale of this issue, ONTO 2050 recommends that climate mitigation work cannot just happen within the region, though that's important, but we also need to comprehensively address energy and climate change at the federal and state scale. If we go to the next slide, we can get a better sense of just where these emissions are coming from. The ONTO 2050 Regional Greenhouse Gas Inventory presents the emissions by subsector. And you can see the stationary energy sources are sectors in purple, a range of purple colors. Transportation is in green and waste is in blue. Our four largest subsectors are in residential buildings, commercial and institutional buildings and facilities, manufacturing industries, and then on-road transportation emissions. And as a result, ONTO 2050 is recommending strategies that reduce our emissions from our transportation sector, so working on that big green slice of this pie chart, and then increasing low and zero emission energy generation. So really focusing in on those purple areas in this pie chart. Switching gears a little bit, if we go to the next slide, We know that northeastern Illinois has already experienced and is projected to see even greater changes in temperature and precipitation. This can result in an increase in extreme heat, increases in flooding due to the frequency and intensity of storm events, reduced soil capacity from drought, and then increases in winter rain and heavier, denser snow. This data is coming from the 2018 National Climate Assessment, and it shows the observed changes so far in temperature on the left. In Illinois, our average annual temperatures have already increased by 1.5 degrees of Fahrenheit. And we also see the projected changes by mid-century and then late century shown on the right. In the high emissions scenario, which is shown on the far right, we see increases in temperature continue, potentially reaching up to 8 degrees by the end of the century. And I'm focusing in on that high emissions scenario, just based on our current news. It seems like we're on track with that scenario. In the next slide, we can see that our region is, in addition to becoming warmer, the region's climate is becoming wetter and more variable. Again, this data comes from the 2018 National Climate Assessment. It shows observed changes so far in precipitation on the left. In Illinois, the state recently updated our data on rainfall. That's led to pretty substantial increases, are reflecting the substantial increases we have felt so far. And this has big implications for infrastructure and development design. Our projected changes by late century are shown on the right under a high emissions scenario. And we're projecting some pretty substantial increases in precipitation in the winter and spring. We are also seeing that while annual precipitation is steadily increasing, more of that rain is coming down in singular large storm events that can overwhelm our gray and green infrastructure. So in this context, ON2 2050 recommends a number of strategies to plan for resilience. This ranges from incorporating adaptation measures into planning and development, strengthening our gray and green infrastructure, and improving our operational response to extreme weather events. But it also identifies strategies to help make our agricultural lands more resilient, and it encourages us to explore what regional coordination is needed to respond to these challenges. So with that, let's switch gears and talk about CMAP's climate resources and our current work plan. CMAP has been working in the climate space for a bit now, and so I want to make sure that everybody's aware of the current resources that we have, and then I want to fill you in on what we're working on this current year. So the next slide, I won't step through all of these resources, and I'm happy to connect you with any of them later on if you'd like, but I did want to provide a sample of what our work has covered to date. So in policy and guidance, we've produced several guides and different tools and research approaches, and most of these have been focused on assisting local governments with adaptation efforts. So for example, we partnered with the American Planning Association to develop a guide for how to incorporate climate science into our local planning efforts. Similarly, we've provided planning assistance via our local technical assistance program, and these projects have mostly been designed to help with resilience work, including climate vulnerability assessments or stormwater plans or stormwater components of other types of plans. And we've also done a couple of projects that work on the mitigation front. In the next slide, you can see that, of course, CMAP programs transportation dollars, and these programs have historically focused on improvements in air quality, not necessarily the same thing as a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions, but they share some commonality there, as well as programs that encourage mode shift from single occupancy cars to more walking and biking. A couple of things to note here. ON2 2050's regionally significant project evaluation included criteria that measured reductions in greenhouse gas emissions by project. And then most recently, our new STP shared fund now encourages the incorporation of green infrastructure, which can help with adaptation in project design. In the next slide, and last but not least, we've got data that we provide for the region to assist in climate planning. So from the regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory that helps us track performance on mitigation efforts, to our regional flood susceptibility index, which identifies areas in the region that are more susceptible to flooding and can be used to prioritize our efforts. So hopefully that gives you a good range of the resources that we provide for climate work to date. In the next slide, you can start to see what we're working on this year. So we have a project to work on a climate multi-year implementation plan. Let's put a pin on that. I'll talk about that more in a minute. We have projects to explore transportation mitigation strategies, really evaluating what are all the options to reduce our transportation emissions and what could be most effective to implement in our region. We're also taking a look at how to better integrate climate mitigation and adaptation techniques in our technical assistance program. We're reviewing our climate data inventory, identifying where our gaps are and where we could assist stakeholders in their climate planning work with data. And then we're also developing an approach to reporting out on greenhouse gas emissions from our transportation system on a more regular basis. We also have a number of other projects. So we flip to the next slide. The Central Council of Mayors approached us via an LTA application to assess the vulnerability of their transportation plan to flooding and help them identify specific strategies to address those areas. We've also convened a CMAP talks, a set of quarterly conversations with county and city stormwater leaders to talk about stormwater resilience. CMAP is also assisting the Metropolitan Mayors Caucus with their project including a partnership with the Global Covenant of Mayors to develop a municipal climate action plan. This would identify steps for local governments to reduce emissions and reduce the impact of those climate changes. And then last but not least, we are exploring a heat susceptibility index. So trying to get a better handle on where extreme heat could impact the region and who it could impact. So that gives you a broad sense of the types of projects that are currently underway within the agency. But now I want to switch to the next slide and talk about climate multi-year implementation planning. And actually in our next slide, we have the project purpose to develop a work plan for the next 3 to 5 years that maps out a strategy for implementing climate-related ON-TO 2050 recommendations. In order to do this, we needed to better understand the agency's role, particularly from understanding the context of climate work within the region, as well as what other MPOs are doing across the nation. We need to identify specific strategic projects, and throughout all of this, we need to integrate equity considerations in our work. The next slide shows our scope. We've broken it down into 5 steps, and we've completed the first 2. So we've been holding a series of stakeholder discussions. We've also reviewed our MPO peers across the nation for work that they're doing in this space. And now we're in the process that undoubtedly the hardest part, right, to identify and prioritize the potential actions that we could take going forward. And then we'll get into assessing our resource needs and draft that multi-year plan. So now I want to provide you with some highlights from those first 2 steps, the stakeholder interviews. We contacted about 22 different partners or stakeholders, and we heard a strong focus on transforming energy generation. There's been a lot of work in this area in the region. We also heard of a growing focus on building decarbonization, with a lot of different groups starting to work on this in earnest. We also heard from stakeholders that all of this work requires an equity focus, both on the mitigation side as well as the adaptation side. Stakeholders began to identify some gaps for us. They saw that there was a gap in transportation mitigation work. To date, there's been a lot of focus on electrification, but not necessarily in a comprehensive way. And then we noticed that a lot of stakeholders weren't talking about mode shift or land use as often as they were about electrification. Some of our stakeholders identified a role for CMAP here, that CMAP could identify, prioritize, and coordinate effective strategies in transportation mitigation. In the next slide, we also see the stakeholders identifying a gap in regional and local implementation. So some stakeholders felt that local governments lacked the resources, the knowledge or data, the guidance, as well as the strong champions to take on this work. Some of them saw a role that CMAP could provide direct local assistance, particularly on the mitigation front, and not necessarily in developing plans, but focusing on capacity building and removing implementation barriers. At a larger scale, some stakeholders saw a role for CMAP to play in coordinating regional efforts on climate change. And this coordination role could include developing and disseminating data on both the climate impacts and our progress to date. And other stakeholders saw a gap in engagement with the private sector, particularly with manufacturing sectors on decarbonization. So those are some quick highlights from our stakeholder conversations. In the next slide, I'll step through what we heard or what we saw with our peers. So again, the purpose here is to gain a better understanding of the existing mitigation and adaptation efforts already underway, happening at a regional scale, with the goal that this could spur us to think about new ways to do our work in the Chicago region. We reviewed 21 different peer organizations. These are mostly MPOs from large metro areas all across the US. And we did pay attention to the different state frameworks because that might be inspiring more or less action at the MPO level. Most MPOs are really focused on reducing transportation-related emissions, especially those with state-sanctioned or regulated reduction targets. But even in the absence of that, they are thinking through the different strategies to uncover what would be most effective to reduce emissions, and then transforming their programming or their planning approach to move the region to reach those goals. We also see that many peers are performing regional climate vulnerability assessments. So these assessments identify at-risk communities or infrastructure. They might be looking at flooding, heat, drought, and of course, sea level rise. In addition to providing that data, some of the peers are conducting and using that data to conduct an analysis that reviews the impacts on specific infrastructure types. So that might be the roadway network or culverts or bridges. And then they develop strategies to address those vulnerabilities. And then a smaller subset of MPOs have documented social vulnerabilities along the way and are using that in the context of decision making. Greenhouse gas inventory. So like CMAP, the most common greenhouse gas inventory is done at the regional scale, but we do see MPOs that are providing this at the local scale to assist with local climate planning. And then the most active MPOs are establishing sector targets. So not just reporting out on a regional reduction goal, but breaking it out into transportation and stationary energy, et cetera. And we also found a fair number of MPOs that are working on building decarbonization, either through retrofits of existing building stock or removing zoning barriers to constructing net zero buildings. The next slide shows some more process-oriented findings. So we see many MPOs that are able to expand their impact beyond their traditional scope of an MPO by establishing partnerships with local nonprofits, academic institutions, and government agencies. And then we also see resource sharing as a major enabling action where MPOs are helping to identify and provide a curated list of data and tools. And these resources come in many different forms. So that concludes a summary of our first two steps. In the next slide, you can see our goal for the next phase of work. So we really need to brainstorm potential projects based on what we learned from those stakeholder interviews, the work of our peers, and our existing ONTI 2050 policies. And we need to identify those critical and achievable actions that CMAP can take in the next 3 to 5 years. In the next slide, we are zeroing in on a subset of ONTI 2050 strategies, and those are identified here. And we're using a brainstorming exercise to see how could CMAP contribute to these overall efforts. As we brainstorm these potential paths forward, we recognize that we will have to make some hard decisions, right? There's not enough time in the day or staff to work on all of these items. So we'll be asking ourselves, as I'm hoping to ask you today, what area can CMAP make the most change? And also asking those but-for questions. So if CMAP doesn't work in a given area, are there already partners that are tackling this and can take the lead? Or does it mean that we just won't make progress in that specific sector? So for our brainstorming exercise, we've highlighted these 6 ONTI 2050 strategies. You can see we're taking a look at transforming our transportation systems to reduce emissions, incorporating climate mitigation and adaptation into planning and development, strengthening gray and green infrastructure to withstand climate change. We're also exploring what could be a platform or how can we help coordinate regional efforts, enhancing economic innovation, and then addressing environmental challenges that disproportionately affect specific populations in disinvested areas. So with that, I want to be quiet and ask you a couple of questions that I've listed on the next slide here. So what areas of work present the best opportunities for CMAP to advance change? And then given the purview of this committee within the land use and housing sector, are there specific strategies CMAP should be focusing on? And do you see ways that CMAP can unlock or help jumpstart implementation by other partners? So with that, I'm hoping to hear from all of you, and we can pop these questions in the chat too, if that's helpful.
I would like to ask a question before we get into this. That is, during your stakeholder meetings, what did you define the role of the local governments to be?
You know, we really left that open. So we were hoping to hear from stakeholders on what they thought was happening in the region, and then where they saw CMAP's role in helping everybody to respond to the climate challenge. That doesn't quite answer your question, does it?
No, but
okay.
The answer would be there wasn't much other than an open-ended possibility.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would also like to ask just one quick question, and I'm sorry if I missed this, Nora.
Oh, that's okay.
Can you just give me an idea of who some of the stakeholders were? I didn't catch that.
Yes, I didn't list them, did I? So, goodness sakes, I didn't come with a full list. And Matt, maybe you remember, I'm not sure. We had the Illinois Green Alliance, the Center for Neighborhood Technology, Aaron Dunbaugh, who serves on our Environment and Natural Resources Committee. We heard from Sierra Club and Ready for 100. We talked to this city's Department of Transportation, definitely some folks in state government and IEPA. Yeah, it's not a comprehensive list, I'm sorry, but it sort of hopefully gives you a range of who we were talking to.
Yeah, no, that's helpful. So I get a sense that it was very environmentally focused, which makes sense in this context. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
This is Lisa from Landmarks, Illinois, if I'm interrupting anyone else. Nora, thanks. This was a really nice, comprehensive presentation. I was going to ask the same question about who the stakeholders were. Obviously, from the perspective of the work that I do, I'm most interested in where CMAP can help with the building decarbonization category that you mentioned. And I'm wondering if Elevate Energy was one of the stakeholders you talked to. And, at Landmarks, Illinois, we've been talking about trying to do a series of talks on, again, that very issue, especially as it relates to solar panels and retrofitting for not just historic buildings, but older buildings in general. And so I'd love to talk about the opportunity to have some discussions with CMAP, with Elevate Energy and some other potential partners, even maybe AIA, about maybe co-sponsoring a talk with us, because we were talking about it for the first quarter of next year. So anyway, I'm hoping that was still going to be one of the focus areas, was infrastructure for the built environment.
Great, thanks, Lisa. Yeah, I'm taking notes for our staff member who's really figuring out the pathway for that mitigation and adaptation work in planning and development. I believe we talked to Elevate Energy. If we didn't talk to them, we talked to a bunch of other people who are involved in focusing on how do we transform new construction, as well as how do we retrofit our existing building stock. A lot of them talked about passive techniques, as well as solar and how do we get EV charging infrastructure into buildings. So the conversation was it hit on multiple different fronts. And we did hear from partners that, they've identified some of the barriers, but they need some distribution mechanisms for understanding how that we can collectively improve our building decarbonization efforts. So thanks for bringing that up.
Are there any more questions at this time for Nora?
Yeah, I actually do have a question. So I heard you say, Nora, that there was more of a focus on electrification rather than mode shift and land use, and being kind of in the transit industry. I'm just curious if those stakeholders elaborated on, I guess, is transit not seen as helpful going forward in any kind of mitigation, or when it comes to this region's dealing with climate change? If there's any expanding on that.
No, they didn't say that. It was more about just that there's a lot of focus on how can we electrify the single occupancy vehicles, and what legislation is needed, and how do we roll out charging networks, and just that was occupying a lot of people's space, but it definitely wasn't a statement about the lack of the need of transit to help us with the climate challenge.
Great. So for the sake of time, I know we're going to be hearing back from you, because this is a conversation and that's going to go on for many years in a great way, and I know the input's great. So we will definitely be hearing probably sooner rather than later as you're progressing through. So thank you. And I think if people have other questions, I'm sure that Nora would welcome them, or comments. And I think here is her email address is up there. So feel free to give Nora as much feedback as it comes to you after this meeting is over. So thank you, Nora. That was great.
Thanks a lot.
And I think with that, we're going to move on now to another important issue, particularly to many communities around the region, and that is our policy solutions to disinvestment. And I guess I'm going to turn it over to Timi. Now, I hope I can say this right, or maybe I'll let you say your last name, Kimi.
Thank you. My name is Timi Kayejo, and I am a policy analyst here at CMAP. And today we're just going to be sharing some of the initial work that we are doing in moving forward some of the disinvestment work that CMAP has already started. And Matt is the co-project manager on this project, so I had to agree to his invitation to come present to all of you, and I'm happy to do so. So on the next slide, I just want to give some of the project background. This is really building upon prior work that CMAP has been doing in trying to scope this space out in onto 2050 development, both through the inclusive growth work, which really emphasized the understanding that economic opportunity for all residents, no matter what one's racial or ethnic or economic background is key to moving the region forward overall, as well as the other work that was in Onto 2050 around reinvestment and infill. Those are planks that we're building upon. And there's also have been some initial work that CMAP staff had been pursuing to implement the disinvestment recommendations that we similarly are building upon. So moving on to the next slide, this disinvestment work is implementing and supporting two Onto 2050 recommendations. The first being target infill infrastructure and natural area investments. As you can, next slide. So that's the first of the plan recommendations that this work is supporting. And then on the next slide, the second recommendation is invest in disinvested areas. We know this is not a new topic for the region, and we are really interested in further taking on this topic at a regional scale, but with the support of all the experts that have been doing this work in their day-to-day livelihoods. So on the next slide, this is just one of the graphics and analyses that was produced out of Onto 2050 that overviewed the geography of disinvestment in the region. The areas that are shaded in hash are the major job centers in our region, and the colored areas, though they have various definitions, the blue disinvested areas focus more on areas that have seen reductions in commercial investment, as well as reduced employment levels. The yellow areas are economically disconnected areas, which are more people-based metrics that show areas in our region that are disproportionately home to low-income residents, residents of color, and those for whom English is a second language. And the green areas just show that a number of those areas overlap. And this also, to a good amount, just visualizes what we all know, that our region has significant racial and economic segregation, and that leads to stark differences in life outcomes by place and race. And there's a number of complicated factors that have caused this over the decades, from deindustrialization and historic and present-day systemic racism, but it all has manifested in areas of our region that have seen sustained declines in population, as well as public and private investment, which has both eroded tax bases and public services. And the real challenge is the aspect that how these can be both causes and effects of continued disinvestment. So the next slide overviews the project goals that we have put together for this work. First is comprehensively assessing the conditions and drivers of disinvestment in our region while using a racial equity lens, as well as conceptualizing as this problem as a structural challenge. And secondly is developing policy recommendations to intervene in these cycles of disinvestment through targeted programs and prioritized investments. And we know that disinvestment relates to challenges of affordability, concerns about displacement by new development vis-a-vis gentrification. And while we will be acknowledging some of those challenges, we also do know that disinvestment itself is a specific and a unique challenge. So this next few slides will be going through what our approach is to this work. I want to heavily caveat that we are still developing the approach and open to feedback, but the current project framing is outlined on this next slide. So on the next slide, you can see that disinvestment is one possible result of a dynamic system of reinforcing physical, and economic cycles. We really see the need to understand the interconnections between the challenges that disinvested communities face, whereby reduced tax bases may then lead to elevated property tax assessments, which is a barrier to further economic development, and eroded tax bases then impact infrastructure maintenance just to give an example of the way that these are very interconnected and complex challenges and require understanding the problems as such. Secondly, this investment is intrinsically tied to historic and present-day systemic racism, as seen through, at this point, a substantial body of research about redlining, urban renewals, and whatnot, and the disproportionate impact on Black and Brown communities those policies have had, and we see it similarly as important to take that into account going forward. But lastly, we also want to acknowledge that despite these challenges, communities facing this investment have numerous assets which will be key in leveraging as we identify policy solutions. This next slide just quickly overviews some of the planned analyses that we're looking forward to engaging in: vacancy rates, business and residential lending, state tax disbursements, and infrastructure maintenance. In all of these areas that we're looking to dive into further, we are and will be conducting literature reviews, data analysis, as well as stakeholder interviews. Moving to the next slide, in terms of the policy development, we're looking to identify intervention points that can spur equitable reinvestment, as well as strengthen existing relationships and tap into the work that's already underway to pursue policy change in this space. We really acknowledge that undertaking this work at a regional scale is a newer focus area for CMAP, and we're really looking forward to building upon the work that has already done. And then, if you could go back to that policy development slide, the last point was that we expect to produce policy recommendations in fiscal year 2022. And even though we'll produce some recommendations at that point, countering this investment is going to be an ongoing CMAP work stream. Finally, just discussing next steps and having some discussion questions. We'll be continuing to do the literature review and analysis in this year and during the winter, go through stakeholder and expert interviews. Throughout the duration of 2021, we'll be producing a series of interim policy products that relate to those different subcomponents of analysis I listed earlier. And lastly, we expect to have a final report in fiscal year 2022 that will be the first outline of some of the policy recommendations that we have identified. So I've talked for a bit, and now I'm really excited to hear your reactions to the overview of this work that we'll be engaging within, and get your reactions as well. So three of the questions that we brainstormed that we would like your feedback on are: one, how does this investment show up in your community or impact your work? Two, are there particular aspects of this problem where it's more important for CMAP to study and recommend solutions? And lastly, who else should we be talking to, as we acknowledge that robust engagement will be crucial for this work to succeed. So with that, I'll stop talking, but excited to hear your thoughts about this work. Thank you.
This is Adam. Thank you for the presentation. It was really good. Really, I think important to set a baseline of understanding about what this investment really means and the impacts it has. So thank you. I actually think, just as an initial thought for discussion, I think there's ties between your presentation and the previous presentation as well. I think that one potential linkage is that the work of decarbonizing the economy, especially when I think about like buildings and transportation to a certain extent, that's going to require investments being made in a lot of disinvested communities. Because one thing that I thought about during the last discussion that I didn't have time to weigh in on was that I think CMAP is, and specifically this community, I guess, is our focus on land use. We need to think about really, where the biggest opportunities are to make a difference. And I think that, again, we need to use an environmental justice lens. A lot of disinvested areas are also disproportionately impacted by pollution, for sure, right? But also high carbon industry, whether it's freight transportation or what heavy industry is left in the area. It tends to be concentrated in disinvested areas. So I think that bridging these two discussions we've had is important to look at opportunities where we can address mitigating climate change and hopefully starting to turn back the tide on carbonization by also looking at what communities that are already disinvested are already dealing with those issues on a higher level, and look for ways to target investment there to fight those issues.
Absolutely, Adam. And we have been, even just in the past week or so, been engaging with the climate team on brainstorming for the multi-year planning that Nora had overviewed, specifically about how we can make sure that there are those linkages in the work. So yeah, and it's so good that you brought that up, because the connections are really clear, and it's important that we make sure that they are made.
Any other questions or comments?
I'm really,
Go ahead, Miriam.
yeah, I'm really excited about this work. I'm really want to commend you all for doing this and taking this on. I think, certainly not having seen, the list of stakeholders you're anticipating talking to, but I want to really encourage you to talk to people on the ground who live in disinvested communities to really understand what's happening in those places, both from, employment situations, circumstances, and access to opportunity, and how they've seen change. Because I know a lot of times these tend to be like higher level, talking to people who may not live there. So I want to encourage you to work with community-based organizations as much as you can. Also, I just also want to encourage you in the analyses part, it was a lot of like place-based analyses. And so I want to encourage you to think about the people aspect of that as well. But I'm really excited to see what you guys come up with.
Yes. Those are great points. Matt and I in our discussions have similarly wanted to figure out the best way that we can incorporate the experience of those residents into this work, as well as while this project is there's a lot of kind of geography and places, it's ultimately in service of the people and residents who live there. So really appreciate those suggestions, and whether now or going forward, would love to hear further ideas for CBOs or other groups that we could possibly connect to.
And I'm going to follow up with Miriam, because I know there are a lot of initiatives going on in different neighborhoods in the city, such as Chatham, you name it, all around. And be interesting to know how some of the what successes some of them are having, why it's happening. What are the roadblocks to getting those successes? How is it impacting the people there? Because I think one of the things that I'd be concerned with too is this development without displacement. Because we want to make sure that we want the neighborhoods to thrive, but we want to make sure that the people are there that can stay there if they choose. So those would be some of my thoughts. I don't know, does anybody have any other thoughts before we move on? And if not, and we will also, this is obviously another topic that will be back anytime. I mean, this one thing, it's exciting that CMAP is doing so much really important work these days, that these are topics that will continue.
I did see Caitlin raised her hand. Caitlin, did you have a?
Yeah, hi. So I have two suggestions. One, I think it would be really helpful to have like some case studies here so that we could I mean, the area that you're talking about is really a vast geographic area. So it's hard to think in specifics when it's such a general area. So maybe like 3 different case studies for different parts of the region and the challenges that they're facing would just really help to, so that you have a framework for thinking about things. And then my other comment is that it's sort of the opposite side of the coin of what Miriam is saying. I mean, you definitely need to talk to the community residents, but I also think it's important to make sure you're talking to the investors. If you're envisioning some kind of investment, envision who would be making that investment, and then go talk to those people about what it would take to get them to do it. I think that's a piece that planners leave out quite a bit. They don't actually talk to the people that would do the work, the real estate developers. They don't tend to be maybe our favorite people, but if we want them to do something, we need to have their perspective. And I think they generally are, they will be very forthright, and if you have conversations with them, you will learn more about their perspective and learn things that you just never even thought of. So I would say it's as important as talking to the community. If otherwise, you can do all the plans you want and no one's ever going to come.
I think that the lenders too. Be interesting to have conversations with some key bank, mortgage, companies that, maybe any one of us have a relationship with too that we can recommend. But I would think CMAP has a grasp on those, especially those local players.
Well, I would build on what Caitlin and Lisa said. I mean, bring in the CDFI community and talk to those, like my organization, IFF, LISC, and the others who are actually doing the work in these neighborhoods. And to Caitlin's point too, to talk to the developers, and we can set you up with any number of ones that we think do it particularly well in these communities. They're there and they're great and they're involved, and they listen to the residents and they really seek that kind of input. So there's a way of doing it right. And some of these folks, like I think of Leon Walker at Deal 3 Realty, he's written white papers on how to engage the communities in development and disinvested communities. So there's a lot of good information out there.
And I just want to
go ahead, please.
Okay, thanks. This is Angela again, and I agree with everything everyone's being said. As someone who lives in a pretty disinvested neighborhood, as I look outside at like 10 vacant lots in Washington Park here, I think it is important to really engage those community organizations that are on the ground as well. The lenders is a huge piece because that's obviously not going to happen without it. But I think often some of the community organizations that aren't as sexy and that aren't quoted in the paper get left behind. So making sure we're engaging those grassroots organizations that are doing work that don't get to do TED Talks and such. So I think that'll be really important as well.
No, all these comments were really great. I know the time on our agenda was short, but we definitely really appreciated this, and I'm sure we'll be coming back to this committee soon or in the near future as we continue this work. So thank you, everyone.
Okay, well, in the sake of time, since we're running a little late as we usually do, maybe we need to shorten the number of items we have on.
Hey,
Nancy?
Yes.
Yeah.
Would you mind if I pop in for just a second and comment on some of the conversation that we were just having? It's Aaron.
Of course.
Thanks. It's hard to break into the discussion when you're not in the room together. But hi, everyone. If you haven't met me before, I'm Erin Alama. I'm the executive director. So I feel like I, in a virtual role, need to introduce myself. I just wanted to sort of piggyback off of what we were just talking about, is connecting to more local organizations or people who have experience, and also thinking about the people side of the equation. It's something that we've been thinking about a lot at CMAP, and we are making a commitment to put out an RFP to help us retain somebody who's going to be an intermediary to help us with that local perspective, to help us design a way for us to get quality engagement and representation from across the region from stakeholders who do work with community members. I think that's one of the things that we've been, thinking about as we go into the next long-range plan update, and as we think about some projects like these as well. It's how do we bring in the local voices and perspective that we don't, it's a little hard for us to go in and say, hi, we're from the government, you've never heard of us, we're this regional agency. So recognizing that before the end of the year here, you will see an RFP put out for exactly that program design for engagement on projects like this to help us increase our efforts to reach environmental justice communities and to help us improve sort of this conversation that we all want to have about equity in our region. So I'd also ask that when that comes out, we'll forward it to committee members and ask that you all help us make sure that we're getting a quality response to that as well. So wanted to make sure that you were all aware of that, but thanks for letting me butt in here.
Oh, anytime, Erin, you are always welcome. And I'm going to take the liberty of the chair to kind of move us along. So the next item on the agenda was the guide that CMAP has done. And if you haven't had a chance to look at it, please do. I think maybe if this is something of interest, we can bring back maybe to the next meeting or a future meeting to maybe delve into, but please take a look and read it. And maybe it's be an opportunity to talk about some examples that are really working and some that don't work so well. So I'm gonna, if that's all right with everybody, just move it along, but please do take a look at it. It's really very informative. And so having done that, I am going to move down to, we always like to hear from at least one member and what's going on in their area. So with that, Paul Haas from DuPage has been doing a very interesting project I'm interested in hearing about. It's an LTA project working with CMAP on a zoning corridor overlay district. So with that, I am going to turn it over to who is going to take this one? I guess Paul. Would you like to talk about the project that you're working on?
Paul was supposed to talk about it, and this is Dominic from CMAP. And seeing how everybody here has worked in government, you can understand that there are fires that come up that you need to take care of. Paul got called away by somebody with the county board that he needs to take care of. But as luck would have it, I am the project manager on CMAP side for this LTA project, which is a zoning corridor overlay for a portion of Lake Street in DuPage County. So I can speak a little to this in Paul's speech. This project is something that's very piques a lot of our interest, simply because it is to facilitate economic development along Lake Street in a corridor in Lake Street, along Lake Street in DuPage County. And it incorporates 4 different types of government entities. DuPage County, and it will also do the villages of Roselle, Hanover Park, and Bloomingdale. So this corridor cuts through all of those aspects. And there was a previous corridor study for Lake Street that was done a few years ago. This is implementing it for a much smaller aspect. It's going to be a consultant-led project by Teska Associates. Michael Blue, who some of you are familiar with, will be leading the project from that angle right there. And it is about to kick off within the next month, and it will take 12 months from initial kickoff among the 4 different government aspects, bringing in the community steering committee and that aspect to the final implementation. The interesting thing is that as Lake Street cuts across 4 different government entities, the consultant is going to have to work with each to make sure that there's a steady, consistent zoning that goes through Lake Street, so that each municipality is working in conjunction with each other, so that a developer coming in, as we've just spoken about that in our previous discussion item, will know with certainty, will know with clarity what needs to be done if a project is to go forward, so that the communities are working in tandem with each other, so that we, as we speak at CMAP here on a regional level, that we're able to facilitate growth by updating the zoning code such that it's modern, such that it facilitates economic development growth along those in that corridor. So working with all those municipalities, it brings certainty and clarity. Again, this will be kicking off within the next month with staff meetings, and then steering committee, and then community outreach, hopefully before the holidays kick in too much, and will last over the next year. So.
Right.
Mm-hmm. And oh, go ahead, Nancy. I'm sorry.
going to ask if you had more to add. I thought you were ending, but go ahead. Finish.
I was ending for that portion right there. So yes.
All right. So are there any questions on this? It should be an interesting project. And I think as it gets completed, it'd be interesting to get a report back and to see how, if there was cooperation along a major roadway, we'd have more intergovernmental cooperation, which would be a terrific goal that might come out of this project as well. So
yes, I definitely see that. I think we'll be coming back to this committee with updates throughout this process, because this is something with, as we throw out this number consistently here at CMAP, we have 284 municipalities and communities here in the region, and we're looking to work together so that our political boundaries do not become just harsh boundaries for economic development, but that we can share that among the various communities. So I think moving forward, this was something that we will be coming back in terms of how cooperation was occurred throughout the communities right there. And also speaking from as the liaison here for the Land Use and Housing Committee, this section right here where we talk about select member status updates going forward into 2021. This is a section of the agenda we would like to see our members, just if you have something that's come up that you want to bring up for discussion or make other committee members aware of, or just have a question, please feel free to bring that up in this section so we can facilitate discussion and networking, not in a pressurized way. You do not have to have a coordinated presentation, you know, with the right colors, music, alliteration, or anything like that, but just something you can share among the members. And I think that is something in a virtual environment that we'd like to be able to do, which is just facilitate a little more discussion. So thank you, Nancy.
you're welcome. So any other comments on this very interesting LTA project? If not, moving right along, and this will get us out on time, we hope now. The next item I'm going to turn over to Dominic to talk about the future leadership of this committee.
Thank you, Nancy. And then as you members of the committee have been seeing, Nancy Furfer has been leading this meeting right here. As she alluded to at the beginning of this meeting, it is a preview of 2021 as Nancy has been elevated to chair. We look forward to her leadership moving forward and appreciate all her service she's done in the past as vice chair and as chair of the previous, I believe, housing committee. And then Adam Ballard will be serving as vice chair, and we would like to congratulate him, and we look forward to his continued input as we move forward here with this committee and into 2021. Mark Van Kerkhoff will continue to be a member of this committee. And naturally, he's not here, so we'd like to do something a little more formal at our February meeting in terms of thanking him for his service as chair. But we do want to acknowledge it here that everything he has done, he and Nancy, as these two committees were blended together as we move forward, and the leadership is taken over the last couple of years. We do very much appreciate that, and we look forward to everyone's service in their senior leadership position going into 2021. So thank you very much, and welcome to our new chair and vice chair.
Well, thank you. And I thank all of you. I thank you for allowing me to do this. And I'm really excited to work with Adam, although I've known Adam for a bit on other committees. And this is a great committee, and I'm really excited about the work that CMAP's doing and that we get to have some input on it. So thank you all, and thank you all for continuing to participate. Next meeting, we will give the proper thanks to Mark. Unfortunately, we were planning to do it today, but I guess that will have to wait till the next meeting. So moving on from there, we do have a schedule that has been proposed, and we do need a formal acceptance of this. So Matt, did you want to make any more comment on this schedule that we have for the coming year?
Sure. Yeah, so in the agenda, and Michelle, if you're available to advance the slides through the incentives presentation and onto the the meeting presentation or the slide with the meeting schedule, that would be great. Perfect, thank you. This committee has traditionally met the first Tuesday of every other month, beginning in January and extending through November. We are proposing to keep that first Tuesday of every other month schedule, except looking back at the 2020 calendar, we realized that beginning in that January, oftentimes the January meeting ended up being canceled because it was so close to the new year. And a series of issues arose, proximity to July 4th, proximity to Labor Day. And so this schedule that is on your screen now, it's also in the agenda, maintains that first Tuesday of every other month's framing, but shifts back starting in February and ending in December for hopefully six meetings during 2021. Now, I understand it's so hard with a group this size to find dates that work consistently for everyone. And I understand that these dates are not good for every member of the committee, and I want to extend a preemptive apology for that, obviously, with managing so many schedules and so many CMAP committee meetings, it can be hard to find times that work well. So with that, Nancy, I think it probably makes sense to entertain a motion to approve, entertain any discussion, and then I can do a roll call vote.
Yeah, I think that's right. And if there's any discussion, that's great. If there's some committee members whose organization can't be represented by them because of a conflict, and there's somebody else in that, because you all represent important organizations that really, your voice is really important to this committee, we're glad to, let us know. And with that, if there are any questions on that or comments on this proposed dates? And if not, would somebody like?
I do have one question.
Oh, sure.
Sorry. Although today's meeting was very item heavy, are you anticipating any lack of material for the meetings? Because this does seem to be a bit robust. I didn't know if 5 meetings would be more appropriate.
I'm sorry, I didn't get the last part of the question.
To me, it looks like 6 is a little too many meetings. But if you believe that there's going to be enough material to discuss at all 6 meetings, then fine. But I don't know if there is going to be enough material.
I can certainly take a crack at that, Nancy. I think that from the perspective of the liaison to the committee, Dominic and I are always seeking to juggle a wide variety of presentations, both internal CMAP staff presentations from committee members, as well as presentations from outside experts that would be valuable to committee members, as well as things like possible site visits, collaborative meetings where multiple CMAP working committees meet together, and so on and so forth. So at this point, we certainly believe that there is 6 meetings or more worth of engaging material, and we are always open to hearing feedback from any committee member about the kinds of material that they would like to see at these meetings. And certainly if something comes to pass where holding one of these meetings does not make sense, we would certainly cancel it before asking you to come be present at CMAP in person or not for a less than full, less than robust meeting. But I would say that we do believe that we would have plenty of content to bring, especially recognizing that the plan update to Onto 2050 is coming just around the corner, and that's very likely to be present on the agenda of all of our working committees, including this one next year.
And also, if there are issues or topics that people feel are really needed a nice vetting or talking about, we certainly welcome suggestions going forward. I know one of the things is been on my mind, and I hear, that as I'm working with communities around the region, what is going to be the impact on planning and housing after this pandemic is over? Particularly what's going to be the impact on, on housing and businesses and buildings. So I don't know if that's something this committee would like to maybe give some thought and conversation to. So that's something I would throw out there and look for feedback from committee members.
And I think in building on what Nancy's saying right there and what Matt had said in terms of for these meetings, because we have time before the February 2nd meeting, the liaisons are looking to game plan out these meetings in terms of a theme for a meeting, or kind of focusing so that we can plan in advance to bring in the plans we wish to discuss, or the presentations, or the topics. And as Nancy's saying, if there are ideas that the committee members feel that could be better addressed, needs to have more of a public forum, needs to have further discussion, would warrant ideas, we are very much open to having those ideas put forth so that we can plan as we go forward with 2021 meeting agendas. Thank you.
So, if you have thoughts or suggestions on any of this, please let Matt or Dominic know. Feel free to send them ideas, things you think might be really interesting to the committee, important to talk about. Sometimes just thrashing out ideas with some of the experts in the room that we have. I mean, this is a very thoughtful committee. So I would throw that out as well, because as Matt said, the agenda has not been set for next year, and that's something that we'll be thinking about. So hearing from you is always helpful as well. So with that, are there any more comments on the proposed meeting dates? And if not, I would like a motion to accept those meeting dates going forward to 2021. Somebody care to make a motion?
Motion. This is Alan. Motion.
Thank you. A second?
Second.
And we will need a call.
All right, yes, I will do a roll call here. Matt Asselmeyer.
No.
Thank you. Drew Awesome.
Yes.
Adam Ballard. Adam, are you muted?
Oh, can you guys hear me?
I
Yes.
hear you now, yes.
Oh, okay. Yes.
All right, Alan Banks.
Aye.
Angela Brooks.
Aye.
Thank you. Susan Campbell. Tom Chafalo. Lisa DeChiara.
Aye.
Mackenzie Droz had to step away for a minute. I'm not sure she's back at her desk yet. And circle back around to her. David Du Bois.
Aye.
Ben Fenton.
Aye.
Thank you. Nancy Furfer.
Aye.
Veronica Gonzalez.
Aye.
Paul is still not present, I believe. Christine Kolb. Steve Manila.
Aye.
Heather Tabbert Mullins.
Aye.
Arnold Randall, I believe, was here but may have left a little bit early. Caitlin Ritter.
Aye.
Hans for Dennis.
Aye.
Kyle is not present today. Bob Tucker. Bob, are you still with us? Sounds like he might have had to step away. Eric Wagoner. and Miriam Zook.
Aye.
Okay, well, thank you all. I guess we have our meeting dates. Is there any other business anybody would like to bring forward at this time? If not, then is there any public comment out there? It's really hard to do all this when you're virtual. We don't even know if there's public out there. We hope there is. But hearing none, I guess there is nothing new, and I guess we can entertain adjournment even a little early. You get a few minutes back to your daytime. So may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, this is Hans.
Thank you. Do we need a roll call to adjourn?
We do not. I just want to say before we do, thank you all for a great 2020. We're really looking forward to 2021. I know with the oddity of this remote situation that it's been a learning and growth process for all of us. So I appreciate you bearing with us as we've figured out how to administer these meetings are still figuring out how to administer these meetings in a virtual setting. So we hope to be in person again as soon as we can. But thank you all for a great year, and we're looking forward to seeing you next year.
I echo that, and see you all next year.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.